No. Okay. So maybe Kompal, just go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Klaus, and welcome all. Great pleasure to chair this session and great pleasure to have people from different parts of the world come together. Thanks to Klaus and Zoom. So we'll start off with this session with a few presentations and then move on to the next session, which is going to be about the Kuznets Prize this year. The first paper of this session apparently is not going to be presented anymore. There has been a little bit of change in the program, and the presenter is not able to join us today. So which means that we're going to be doing the second presentation first, which is going to talk about changes in parental gender preferences in the US, evidence from 1850 to 2019. And the whole session, this one is going to be about gender issues, but yes, just the paper. So Matthew, are you happy to present right now? I believe it's going to be
Yep, no problem. No problem at all. Let me get set up over here.
All right, so we have extra 15 minutes in our hands right now. So take all your time. And for the ones who are coming after the session, please take your time. So for the ones who are late in the evening, they might be not happy with this change, but yes, we're going to take our time. All right, thank you so much. So Matthew, over to you now, please.
Okay. I have the opposite problem. I made this nice and short, so I hope it's not too short for us today.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. You can all hear me and see the slides correctly, I presume. My name is Matt Millington. I am in the final year of my PhD at Arizona State. This is joint work with Todd Jones at Mississippi State and Joe Price at BYU. And the topic is parental gender preference in the United States. We're going to be taking a long-term look at this. So the question that we're going to ask in this paper, which is, how have parents' preferences for the gender of their children changed over time in the United States? Now, this then brings up a good question, which is, how would you measure how much parents prefer to have boys or girls? So we're going to use a method which is somewhat common. Some people call it the third child method. And we're going to be comparing the probability that mothers have a third child given the gender composition of their first two children. So the way that this is going to work, for example, if mothers have a preference for sons, we would expect that mothers with two girls are more likely to have a third child than mothers with two boys, presumably because they want to have that son. Now, this elsewhere in economics, this method has been used because it's a really nice instrumental variable if you want to study the effects of fertility on anything else. This blank here is insert dependent variable here, because it's plausibly exogenous, but it also matters for fertility decisions. So what we're going to do in this paper is we're going to provide a long-term view of parental gender preference. It's going to be over almost 200 years. It's going to be in an industrialized country in the United States. We're also going to go through higher order births, different numbers of children. For today, I'll just show you the main results. So our time frame is 1850 through 2019. The data that we're going to use is mostly from the US Census, which occurs every 10 years. For the first 100 years, we're going to be using the full count censuses for 1850 through 1940. From 1950 through 2000, we don't have full count censuses, but we have samples. And then for the final two, we're going to be adding American Community Survey data for 2010 and 2019. So this is roughly every 10 years between 1850 and 2019. Now, if we think about the economics of this, thinking about the marginal cost and the marginal benefit of having a third child or a fourth child or what have you, there's roughly two opposing forces. The first, and I recognize this is a little bit hand-wavy, but the first is that the United States has become more gender neutral in terms of its culture, right? So we would expect perhaps parents care a little bit less about the genders of their children. So maybe we would see less of an effect. On the other hand, fertility is decreased, which means that parents are less likely to have a child of the gender that they prefer throughout the course of their normal childbearing. So this would have the opposite effect and would make this more important. Our main empirical specification is this linear probability model. I'm going to show you the version for the third child. That's what we're going to focus on for this presentation. And so this is going to measure the probability of having an additional child conditional on the gender mix of prior children. So we're going to regress an indicator on if the woman has a third child on indicators for the gender makeup of her first two children. So the unit of analysis here is the mother. We're going to have an indicator here for if the first two children are girls, and then an indicator for the first two children are boys. We're also going to have mother's birthplace and age fixed effects. So we know then that the omitted sample, first of all, this what I'm going to show you is over the data is over mothers with 2 or 3 children, and the omitted group here is mothers that have 2 children, but there's 1 boy and 1 girl. Okay, so beta 1 is telling us the additional likelihood of having a third child if the first 2 children are 1 boy and 1 girl. Sorry, if the first 2 children are two girls compared to if there's 1 boy and 1 girl. Excuse me, sorry about that. Everybody with me? So this is pretty basic stuff here. Here's our results for the entire sample. Excuse me. This is the effect of gender composition of current children on the likelihood of having a third child. Again, our sample here is women that have 2 or 3 children. And these 2 lines here are our betas for first 2 girl and first 2 boy. So what this is telling you, this 2.023 here, is that compared to mothers with 2 children, that's 1 boy and 1 girl, mothers with 2 girls are 2.3% more likely to have a third child. Okay. Similarly, for if the first 2 are boys, we have a 2% increase in the probability of having a third child. Now, if we take that, compare it to the dependent variable for the omitted group, this is the probability that a mother with 1 boy and 1 girl has a third child. That's about 1/3. So the percentage change here is going to be 2% divided by 1/3. So roughly the 6% difference in the probability of having a third child. Okay. Now, the only difference here between columns 1 and 2 is that we add fixed effects in the paper. There are a lot more columns here, including columns in the middle, but this is the main gist of it. You can see that doesn't really change our results at all. So what would you take away from this table? The first thing is that you can see that parents tend to have a preference for a mix of genders, right? So if a mother has 2 girls or 2 boys, she's significantly more likely to have a third child. However, there's not much of a difference in the preference between having boys or having girls. It seems to be that they're more focused on a mix. That's even more clear if we look at this over time. So these are our betas by census year for 1850 through 2019. The blue line is the beta for first 2 girls. So the blue line represents boy preference in this case, whereas the red line represents preference for girls. So there's a couple things that I want to point out in this graph. The first is that these lines are very close together and statistically mostly indistinguishable. That further tells us that there seems to be a significant preference for a mix of genders, however, not a strong preference necessarily for boys or for girls. The second thing is if we look at how this has changed over time, I think, interestingly, perhaps even strikingly, for the first 100 years or so of our data, this effect is very constant at about 2%. Then at around 1950, it starts to increase, and we can see that it is settling somewhere at around more like 6%. You can also see, however, that These later census years, as well as these ACS surveys, have less data, so we have wider confidence intervals here. By the way, these are 95% confidence intervals. But in any case, the point estimates are certainly higher. And so we would say that the effect is getting stronger over time. That's even more so the case when you consider the fact that fertility has gone down. And so the probability of having a third child is lower to begin with. So in these later years, the probability of having a third child, if you have two children already, is about 25%. So if we take this 6% increase relative to that 25% baseline, we get about a 25% increase in percentage, right? So there's a 25% more likely to have a third child if they're of the same gender, okay? So according to those, what I said earlier, we can say that the effect is getting stronger over time. And with that, my original 10 minutes is up, and I will invite any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Questions from the floor?
I guess one question is, given that it's kind of noisy here and sort of frustratingly not not really significantly different, have you thought about expanding, like adding Canadian data or looking at OECD level? I'm just thinking of a wider level. We get some bigger sample size and maybe get, because this the last 10 years here is really interesting, but just be curious to see what's happening anywhere else. Maybe you've thought about that.
Yeah, let me just say, I'm not sure about Canada. This result that it's pretty close between girls and boys, in other words, this evidence of a preference for mixed gender, this is what we expect to see nowadays in industrialized countries for sure. So there's been similar papers like this in Europe, or I think there's one in Australia as well. In these industrialized countries, you get a preference for mixed genders. Our contribution to that is that we go much further back than those papers do. Now, if you look at the same thing in some Southeast Asian countries or perhaps African countries, then you do see a significant difference between boys and girls. Those countries tend to prefer boys more than girls, which I think is what you might expect. To answer your question more directly, we have not considered adding more data, but it's a good idea.
Another question might be whether there are any heterogeneities by different groups of the population.
Yeah, we look at one heterogeneity we look at is race. The referees who are very likely to maybe be on the call suggested we look at race, and we did so. One problem is that, especially if you go further back and we look at minority groups, the sample size starts to get pretty small. One thing we did find is, and we mentioned this in the paper, is maybe some suggestive evidence that there might be more of a boy preference, for example, among Asian immigrants. Besides that, we didn't see a whole lot of heterogeneity.
May I add, sorry?
I think
may
Jack
I
has a
add
question.
to this question? Or does Klaus, you want to go first?
You can go first, Chuck. No problem.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in variation across region or space generally, urban, rural, because that's where I would have expected prolonged process of urbanization, cost of housing changes. I would have expected there to be spatial differences.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't remember if we looked at that. We might have looked at that previously. I don't have an answer for you there, but I agree that that's very interesting. I think that the best we have is state by state. But you could probably say something about urban versus rural for that, but I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Klaus?
Well, my issue is, the blue is boy preference, yes?
The blue,
yeah. But isn't this surprising that the largest difference, if there are at all differences, are in the last 20 years or something like that? Wouldn't you say historically there should, my prejudice would have been, yes, boy preferences would be something from the last century or for the 19th or 18th century or whatever, but now it could be different, but now it's the opposite. Why is the blue dominating, and how does this go in line with other research done for the after Second World War gender issues?
Yeah, absolutely. We thought a lot about your second point about the baby boom, right?
Yeah.
And we spent some time in the paper trying to understand, what is happening around here. Is it a baby boom story, perhaps? It's hard to tell. In terms of what is going on here, I don't want to take a stand. I don't want to make any sort of wild guesses. I will just say that what I said earlier, I think, is relevant in the sense that fertility has gone down. And so all else equal, you might expect some boy preference to emerge because fertility has gone down and you're less likely to get boys if you only have 1 or 2 kids versus if you have on average 3 or 4 kids, perhaps. So that would be one potential explanation. I don't want to say anything that could be completely wrong, but that is what we point to for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. I have a couple of questions, thoughts. First is around just this point on the change in the recent decades. I wonder what's the role of the introduction of contraception in the last 30, 50 years, because that was not a choice prior to that. It was kind of become a choice right now. So in line with what you said, that they have fertility has gone down. So I think that's something you could think about. And my other thought was more around extending this work. Maybe what would be the role of birth order, whether it's a first, I know you've got the base case as boy or girl, but yes, how would the birth order story fit in for preferences? Because there is a good literature around that as well. But yes, a very interesting presentation there.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me
questions?
get out of the way here.
Matlu.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry, could I just ask a general question? I mean, what's the bottom line? I mean, why do we care?
Yes. Why do we care is a good question. Let me give a few answers to that. First reason we might care is because if you want to use this instrument on fertility, then you're going to want to know how this has changed over time. Okay, that's kind of an inside baseball sort of answer. The second answer might be that we have declining fertility. We have in many countries, we have what's turning out to be a problem in terms of population growth. And so it's helpful to understand what parents are looking for in terms of the gender of their children, in terms of forecasting what population growth is going to be from here on out. And what we do in this paper is we provide a long-term view for one such country. I think that other countries this just adds to more evidence in terms of this literature of understanding fertility across different countries, how we can project things going forward.
Just to kind of, I don't know, sorry, Kompal, do we have time to kind of have a slight discussion? Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, so there is this kind of idea. One is the idea of preference, but the other one is kind of acting on that preference. It's not a case of where pregnancies are being terminated if you think that it's going to be the gender that you don't want. I mean, there's this, kind of some historical thing or some cultures or whatever, where that might be kind of an active, so to speak, active preference, if you like. But just having a preference in general doesn't necessarily mean that the end result is going to be affected.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Population is, population kind of distribution or whatever you want to call it is not going to be affected too much or at all.
Yeah, sure. I think you could say perhaps preference is the wrong word. I will take that. Yeah, I take that point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matlu. Thank you, Matthew.
I'm gonna
And Sorry, did I hear someone? No, I just want to thank. And now we move to the next paper. I have 5 minutes, and I'll take those 5 minutes to talk about this paper. This paper is a center stage for today's session and more or less the whole conference in some senses. This is the Kuznets Prize paper that's been recently announced, and we've got the author here with us, Professor Bob Breunig. What I have as well alongside are 2 GLO VirtYS Scholars. These are the scholars that we have in the GLO program that's been running for 6 years now. It's led by Olena Nizalova at University of Kent. And it's been mentored, the whole program, by Matlub here and Klaus as well within the GLO. The 2 excellent scholars we have is Tarana Chauhan from Cornell and Zimmermann with us. I can see them on the right of my screen. So please welcome them. The job they have been assigned is to talk a little bit about this paper, what they like about this paper, what if they have any questions about the paper to the author as well. And we've got Bob here to do all the fielding for all of that. So I'll now move to the paper. I've got Astghik as well. She is an associate editor for Journal of Population Economics, and she's also going to talk about the paper. So a lot of attention there for you, Bob, and I will hand it over to you now to talk about the paper, which is talking about female breadwinning and domestic abuse evidence from Australia. And you have an extra 5 minutes because of the change in program. So over to you, Bob. Thank you.
I'll try not to abuse the time. And yeah, it's wonderful to have Astghik here, former colleague from the ANU, who I haven't seen in a while, and who's very involved in organizing the gender economics workshop here in Australia, which was organized by my colleague, Kristen Sobek, earlier last year. I guess she was the key organizer. So yeah, and thank you very much for the Kuznets Prize. I mean, we were really pleased and really flattered to receive that. This was a paper that we struggled a little bit to publish, quite frankly, partly because it uses survey data. And I think one of the concerns that people could potentially have about the paper is the self-reported nature of the violence that we're looking at. I'll talk more about that when I talk about the paper, but that kind of hurt us. And we actually started out, we sent the paper to the AER, we sent it to Journal of Human Resources. So we, as one does in the world, you send it to a lot of places. And the other thing we were kind of running up against was that we find something pretty different than what Anna Azer found. And sometimes there can be a resistance to, if someone's published a very high profile paper that says X is happening, and then you sort of go and say, well, maybe Y is happening, or maybe something different's happening in a different country. It can sometimes be hard to get a bit of traction with that. And then very, very happy to have a home for the paper at the Journal of Population Economics. Very good outcome for us. And that was interesting too, because we ended up with 4 referees. We actually produced an online appendix that's about 3 times longer than the actual paper. And that kind of answers every possible question that you could ever think of. So if you come up with a question that's not covered in either the paper or the online appendix, I'm just going to hold my head in my hands, because we feel like we've done a lot of work on this. So, the beautiful thing about research, though, of course, is that it's it's a vocation, and the process is enjoyable. And Matthew, you're at that beginning stage where you're a PhD student, so you want to land your papers and you want to go get a job and then get on the tenure track. And I'm at that comfortable stage where I have a tenured permanent position, and so the fact that papers can take a long time and involve going down a lot of rabbit holes has become actually a source of pleasure for me now, rather than a source of pain. So that's something for the younger scholars to look forward to as well. All right, let me share my screen after that kind of verbose introduction. All right, can you see my paper? Okay, I've got my cameras in the middle here, but I've actually got my screens like that. So I'm sort of, if I look away, it's not that I'm not paying attention, it's just that I'm looking at my paper. So this is the paper, co-authored with Jacqueline Zhang, who unfortunately can't be here. Jacqueline is the primary author of this paper because she actually really, I think, came up with the idea for this paper. I had done a couple of things. I've written a little bit about gender wage gaps. I have a paper about gender wage gaps in France. I've written a lot about childcare in Australia. And I was looking a little bit at issues about relative income between husbands and wives. And then Jacqueline and I started talking about that work. And then Jacqueline started digging around in data, as one does when one arrives in a new country. So Jacqueline did her PhD at Texas A&M and joined me as a postdoc a few years ago, and came across a survey that I actually wasn't even aware of, which is called the Personal Safety Survey, which is the main data source that we use. And so, yeah, Jacqueline also sends her thanks for the prize and her appreciation to the committee. Okay. So, I guess, what is the main motivation of the paper? The main motivation of the paper is really this kind of empirical fact that despite pretty dramatic improvements in women's economic situation over the last 20 or 30 years, a lot more women in the workforce, women earning more money, women having caught up to men's incomes to at least in the 90s and early 2000s, there was some catch up. Now we're kind of stuck at a kind of persistent gap. We haven't really seen big decreases in domestic violence, and domestic violence remains a kind of feature of male-female relationships in a pretty disturbing way. And the numbers are pretty shocking when you actually look into them. A third of murder cases of women are committed by their partner. About a third of women who've been in a relationship report suffering from physical or sexual violence by partners. In Australia, 1 in 6 women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or previous partner. It's also important to note that this happens to men too, but at much, much lower rates. And one of the nice things about this paper and our data is that we can look at both men and women because we have independent samples of men and women in the data that we exploit. And that's pretty unusual. A lot of surveys would either have households, so you have to deal with the kind of the same people who might be committing and receiving abuse, whereas here we have one survey that's only women, one survey that's only men, and that's going to allow us to look at the differences between the two. Emotional abuse is even more frequent. And this includes, in our paper, what you might think of as financial abuse or financial control. When you move into the realm of emotional abuse, there's perhaps a bit more subjectivity than when you're thinking about physical abuse, and maybe just keep that in mind as we talk through the results. So, the costs of domestic violence are huge, right? I mean, there's the well-being cost to the victims of violence. There's burden on medical facilities, law enforcement services, the loss of human capital productivity. KPMG did a study in Australia about 7 years ago where they sort of added all this up and said the total cost of domestic violence is about $22 billion a year. So this is a big issue, right? This is a big issue for well-being. It's a big issue for productivity. There's kind of, and here, I'm gonna give a very high level flying at 35,000 feet over the landscape kind of idea where I think there's fundamentally kind of two theories about domestic violence in relationships. One is a sort of household bargaining story where, think of a cooperative bargaining model. Generally, if people are in a relationship, they're going to be cooperative, although this could be non-cooperative too. And you think about the standard kind of Nash bargaining setup where, as the outside option for someone improves, then their bargaining position within the household, within the couple improves. And this suggests that as women's economic power increases, their outside options increase, and they should have a better bargaining position within the household, and they can then leave if there's domestic violence, or they can prevent domestic violence by increasing their bargaining position. So there's a few different papers. There's a nice paper by Tauken that looks at this, for example. And she has both cooperative and non-cooperative setups. The other theory is more the gender identity theory, social norm theory, or male backlash theory. And this was sort of brought into economics in Akerlof's 2000 paper. And then I think it's gotten a lot of prominence since Marianne Bertrand's work that looked at women's labor force participation and women out-earning men seems to have a negative relationship on a bunch of measures of relationship quality, seems to lead to higher levels of separation and divorce, and leads women to spend more time on home production. You would think that as women out-earn men, if you think of standard specialization theory, the men should start switching to home production if the women are more productive in market production, but that's not what we see happening. We see the opposite in the data, and we see this in Australia too. Gigi Foster has a paper that's in Population Economics a couple of years ago where she looks at this for Australia. So that's the kind of theoretical context in which we're operating. So this might lead you to an opposite conclusion that women are going to experience more violence because of the backlash against their growing economic power. And previous research is pretty mixed. So I've already mentioned the Anna Azer paper, which uses hospitalization, finds that that as women make more money within the household, so an increased share of women's income in the household leads to lower domestic violence. This is pretty kind of standard. Your bargaining position improves, less violence is committed at home. There's also an RCT in Ecuador looking at cash transfers, which seems to see a decrease in violence as women's economic power is increased. But there's a ton of research looking, that goes in the opposite direction as well. So a sociology paper by Macmillan looks at when women spend more time with their husbands because the men are unemployed, that increases domestic violence when women have jobs. So again, it seems to be a kind of backlash thing. There's an Erickson paper that's gone through a couple different iterations. The final results are very different than the original working paper, but at least one version looks at the Azer methodology of hospitalizations, and they actually find a positive effect of women's economic position on domestic violence. So going the opposite direction of the bargaining and more in line with the backlash theory. And then there's a couple of RCTs in Mexico that also find backlash. So women get these cash transfers are directed at women, and then there's an increase in domestic violence against them because the husbands are, we don't know the mechanism, but it's that the husbands are resentful or there's backlash against this increased economic power of women. So I guess what's kind of complicated, if you think about this, is more than one mechanism might be present, and different mechanisms might operate at different levels. And that might lead to some kind of non-linear relationship between women's economic condition and partners' abusive behavior. And then there might be important cross-country heterogeneity in determining the direction of the relationship. And one of the things, Kompal, Astghik, you can jump in and correct me if my observations about Australia are incorrect. But I'm from the U.S. and I'm married to a French woman, and one of the striking things in Australia is how gender segregated Australian society is. Right? You go into a primary school, and there are like no male teachers, or the male teachers are this exception, right? You go into a primary school in France, 50% of the teachers are male. My wife runs a childcare center. She has no male staff. She has one male staff who's the cleaning guy. And then she's got a gardener who's male. That's it. She's got two men. That's what they do. All the educators are women. 50 educators, they're all women, right? And this is really striking in Australia. So Australia is this very traditional country when it comes to gender norms. And also we've had a lot of immigration, and a lot of that immigration has been from countries, even going back to the 50s, that probably are pretty conservative in terms of their gender relations. So part of the interest in this paper was that, we kind of observed this around us, and then we thought, how does this play out in Australia? So as I said, we're going to use a population survey that has a separate independent male and female sample. And we're going to exploit the gender identity norms reflected in the long-term trend of income inequality between genders in Australia. And what we're going to show is that female breadwinning, which violates these gender norms, is a strong determinant of abusive behaviors against women. And then, as I said, 120 pages of robustness checks for those of you who are so inclined. So yeah, just to preview the findings. So we have female breadwinning leads to a 35% increase in the likelihood of suffering partner violence from men, and a 20% increase in the probability of suffering emotional abuse. So these are pretty strong effects. Male breadwinning reduces partners' abusive behavior, but the effect is not statistically significant. I'll show you that in pictures in a second. And then what we find is that at least in our data, and it's important, I'll say something more about our data in a second, but at least in our data, we don't find much effect on the intensive margin. So we don't find that there's sort of, that as women's economic power grows, somehow there's an increase in the amount of domestic violence against them. So it's more, is there violence or not, that's determined by female breadwinning or affected by female breadwinning. And that's probably a function of our data, because our data are people who are in relationships. And so for people who've suffered very serious violence or lots and lots of instances of repeated violence, you might imagine that the relationship would end and these people would leave. So this survey and the questions we use and the people we're looking at, all of them are partnered, because we're looking at the relative income share of women relative to the total of male and female income. So these are people who are in partnerships. And then for men, similar, their relative income relative to the sum of the couple's income. And so we're probably picking up something pretty different than what Azer and Erickson pick up, in that we're not picking up the extreme kind of violence that ends up in hospitalization. And a lot of the people in our data report kind of one or two instances of domestic violence. So these things have not been severe or persistent enough to cause the relationship to end. And so we're conditioning on still being in the relationship. But we do have information about past violence from previous partners that we use for controlling. We have information about experiences of abuse in childhood that we also use as a control. Okay, and then in the robustness checks, we sort of show that this effect really cuts across all different demographic groups in ways that I initially found very surprising. So this effect is there if I only look at high educated people, for example. This effect is there if I only look at people who were born in Australia. So if I kind of remove the immigrant group, who are in Australia, a very substantial portion of the data, right? About 28% of people in Australia are born in another country. So, so this is not driven by, a set of migrants who've come to Australia from countries with very traditional gender norms. This is not driven by, high education groups and it's also pretty consistent across the ages. So that, I think, in many ways is probably, in some ways, one of the most interesting results of the paper. Okay, so as I said, we're going to use the personal safety survey. We're going to use 3 waves of that. We're going to use 2005, 2012, and 2016. There's a 2021 wave that's just become publicly available that the ABS is not very satisfied with. It shows a really dramatic drop in domestic violence that is not matched by other kinds of data sources like police reports and other things. And it could be a COVID effect, because this survey was done during COVID and people were being surveyed often with their partners present in the household, which hadn't been the case with previous surveys. And so there may be underreporting in that data. So I've looked at the 2021 data, and yeah, it's got some issues. And then we're going to use some survey of income and housing data, some HILDA data to do some various things. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a set of specific questions about experiences that you've had. So since the age of 15, have you had experienced sexual assault, threat, physical assault, physical threat by a current partner where you were living with at the time, or a previous partner you've lived with? And then partner emotional abuse is aimed at preventing or controlling behavior, causing emotional harm or fear, manipulating, controlling, isolating, intimidating. So there's a whole long list of things that people are choosing from in the survey. The key control variable is relative income. So we're going to be looking at the income of the individual. divided by the income of the individual plus the income of the spouse. So when we look at relative income of women, it's going to be this variable with women as the individual. If we look at relative income of men, it's men who have this individual income here. We also, look at dividing this by total income in the household. So adding in other income of other people who might be in the household, it doesn't affect anything. So this is from the Hilda data. This is just kind of background information that we find the same kind of bunching to the left of 50% that other surveys find around the world. So it's much more common for couples to have men earning a little bit more than women than it is to have couples where women are earning a little bit more than men. So there's been a bunch of, so this is the kind of Bertrand paper, and then there's been some papers that have critiqued using this as a measure of a male breadwinning norm. Those critiques are legitimate, but I think combined, so we show this and then combined with the domestic violence stuff, it's highly suggestive of a male breadwinning norm. But again, I think this is one of the most, it's just, such a powerful picture. And you just see this in every country. You see it in the US, you see it in Sweden, you see it all in France, you just see it all over the world, right? If you just kind of randomly, if you have assortative mating plus a gender wage gap, you're going to get something like this. But the drop is still much more dramatic than you would get if you simulated out of that kind of DGP. So it's pretty striking. So we find this in Australia, and we find this in our data. So this is what our PSS data looks like. So if you look at female partners over in the right-hand panel, so there's a fair number of people who are reporting equal income. Our income data, the reason I presented Hilda is our income data in this survey is not particularly great. People are asked about their income, they're asked about their partner's income, and there's a question that sort of says, make sure you include everything when you think about income. Whereas Hilda asks, 30 income questions about every detailed component of Hilda. But the overall impression of this picture is very much the same, right? So lots of couples where, men are earning a little bit more than women, not many couples where women are earning a little bit more than men. So this big dramatic drop off at 50%.
Sorry, is this all labor income or is this general income?
So this is labor. So they're asked to include all of their income. So up here, this is earnings. So we did this with earnings. Here they're asked to include wage and salary income plus dividend income plus other kinds of income. Yeah, so that is going to mess things up a bit. But the reality in Australia is, if you look at the income distribution, it's not until you get above the 80th percentile that you see people with substantial earnings that come from anything but wages and salary. Australians save a lot through the superannuation system, which is our kind of enforced savings system. And then people don't save much beyond that, unless you get to the kind of top 10%. So I still think this is pretty good for the kind of the median person. What is interesting, and this is again, 17 years of Hilda, is how little this has changed over time. So I live in Canberra, which is the federal capital, and Canberra is a little bubble of kind of left-wing bliss, where everybody thinks women make as much as men, and everybody thinks women and men share child, duties equally, and then you show people this graph in Canberra and they kind of freak out, right? Because what's happening in Canberra, even if that is happening, and it's not clear that is, but it's not happening in the rest of the country, right? So the proportion of men who are earning the majority of income in the household is pretty steady at about 75%. And the women are about 25%, and it just doesn't change much over time. I could show you similar graphs about time use of like men's. I was just at a conference a couple of weeks ago, the Hilda conference, and somebody put up a graph of from going back to 2000, the amount of time that women spend on domestic chores and child minding, and it's gone down pretty dramatically. And then they show the same line for men, and it's literally flat for 21 years, right? So if you want more gender equality, invest in technology and services that help women do less work at home. That is the number one conclusion that comes out of looking at all the data. Because the men, you can't move them. The men aren't moving. The men are doing nothing. The men are like lumps. So just ignore them and focus on the women. That's my policy advice. We can argue about that later if you want. There you go. Bob makes a strong policy claim at page 19. We can note this. Okay, so we try to deal with selection on observables and endogeneity by controlling for as many things as we can. And we worry about, I guess some things we worry about are like underlying characteristics that might produce kind of persistent abuse. So we try to control for that through experience of childhood abuse. You might then worry that people who had abuse previously might strategically choose to make less money than their current partner. So the way we deal with that is just through a Bartik shift share instrument, which, I'm just going to skip over that. I'm not a huge Bartik instrument fan. So, it was kind of the best thing we had going for us. But in some ways, I think just the raw data is so powerful. So let me just show you some data. So what I've got on the x-axis here is the relative income within couple from the point of view of the woman. And what I've got on the y-axis is the probability of partner violence experienced by the woman. And what you see, I think this one picture kind of says it all, what we find in the paper, right? So basically, there's just a flat 4% chance of experiencing partner violence, which dramatically increases up to about 8% when women start to out-earn men. If you look at the confidence bands, these are big, statistically significant differences. You might say, oh, this kind of goes back down over time, but it's important to note that the confidence intervals start to get really wide when you get up above 0.8, because there aren't that many women who are making 4 times what their male partners make. If you look at the same thing for men, you basically find nothing at all. I think this is just the comparison between these two graphs is incredibly powerful. Then if you use our Bartik shift share, prospective income measure, you find very similar things. So even with using this instrument, we're still finding this big increase. So these lines here are just different splines that we've put through the data. And the reason we sort of started with this, we sort of started with the non-parametrics because we were worried about this nonlinear relationship, and we were worried about backlash combining with bargaining theory. How am I doing on time, Kompal? I've sort of paid no attention to the time.
Yeah, you have a few more minutes, Bob. That's fine. We have extra time. Good. So yes, good if we can do it for a few more.
Okay. And then if we look at emotional abuse, we seem to find something similar, although less dramatic. So there's an increase in emotional abuse when women out-earn men, and that seems to be pretty persistent. Men, there seems to be a drop in emotional abuse as they start to earn more relative to their partner. But this result here on the bottom left-hand side goes away once we add control variables. So that's statistically insignificant. So all the significant results are coming out of the women. And then again, if we use the Bartik instrument for income, find something similar. So in many ways, I think those are the main things I wanted to present. I came in with a lot of slides, but I had in my mind that I was going to skip over a few. There's an equation, but I think I've explained to you the kind of main things that we're doing. The results that we get are pretty stable in the presence of adding more covariates. So we're finding, so columns 1, 2, 3 here are the reported income, 4, 5, 6 are the prospective income from the Bartik instrument. If we just run a really simple model with year and geographic fixed effects, we find an effect of about 0.016. If we add in demographic variables and controls about the partner, we find 0.015. And if we add in a whole bunch of additional things about childhood abuse, whether they've had previous partner violence, local unemployment rates to try to capture some of the exposure things that might be going on, again, 0.016. So really pretty stable outcomes. So that my number that I told you before of a 35% increase is basically this 0.016 divided by 0.04 approximately, which is the baseline probability of experiencing partner violence. And then for men, if we add in a panel for men, zeros across the board, precisely estimated zeros. So there's kind of nothing going on in the other direction. And then emotional abuse, we find, I guess what I would say about emotional abuse is that when we use the shift share instrument, the effects are about half of what they are when we use the reported income, which was not true for the violence. So this does suggest that there's some, there might be some endogeneity coming about with the kind of reporting of emotional abuse and who's more likely to report emotional abuse. But even with the instrument, we're finding significant and strong effects with t-values greater than 3. Okay, and then we do some other robustness, which I'm just going to skip over because people might talk about that. So, you know, these are the kind of conclusions. Women are 1.6 percentage points more likely to suffer from partner violence if they earn more than their male partners. That's the kind of bottom line best estimate we have. Women who earn more than their male partners are 3 percentage points more likely to suffer from emotional abuse. The gender norm explanation for physical violence and emotional abuse is stronger than the bargaining story. If the bargaining story were important, I think one of the things you'd expect to see, oh boy, that's really inefficient, Bob. I think if the bargaining story were important, in the top left panel of this slide, I think you would expect to see women's prospects improving as they got closer to the 50% line. So their bargaining power is increasing. So you might see the probability of domestic violence dropping. We don't see that at all. It's just flat before you hit that 50% line. And there's the big jump up. So if you had both of these things coexisting, you might see kind of a decrease and then a jump up. But here, we're not seeing that. So it could be that there is some backlash happening below 50% combined with some bargaining and that the two are washing each other out. So I think, you know, I think future research, kind of disentangling those two mechanisms, I think, and finding clean ways to disentangle those things would be really good. And then again, you know, as I said, it doesn't vary by age, income, decile, education. If I do the same analysis, and instead of using income, I use education, and I compare women who are more educated than their partners, I find no effect. So it's really driven by income. It's not an education effect that I'm picking up. And I guess the policy conclusion is that, you know, I think there's been, you know, maybe some implicit idea that, oh, you know, once women achieve economic equality with men, once women, you know, have similar levels of education and similar levels of labor market outcomes, that these other problems like domestic violence are somehow going to go away. Whereas our results are suggesting that that's not true, that you actually need to specifically think about policies that are going to impact on domestic violence, taking into account, you know, what you're seeing in the data, and that's hard, right? I mean, you know, norms and culture are the hardest thing to change, and economists get very nervous when you start talking about policies whose intention is to change culture or change norms. You know, with good reason. Some of the attempts to do that in the past in countries have led to very bad things. So maybe I'll leave it there. How is that?
Okay, thank you so much, Bob. So what
I took 3 more minutes. Sorry.
That's all right. Absolutely, that's fine. So what I might do is I'll ask you to hold your questions, and I'll invite our GLO's young scholars that we have to here. For people who are not aware of the program, want to know more, I've put a little link in the chat box so that you can have a look at that. And now we have Tarana Chauhan from Cornell. She's the young scholar for GLO for this year, and she will have some thoughts on your paper. So off you go, Tarana.
Thank you so much, Kompal. But I was wondering if Xinyan, would you like to go first? We kind of discussed how we discussed
I just followed the order we had in the program, but yes, if Xinyan wants to go.
So she'll be talking a little bit about the contribution to the literature. So Xinyan, would you want to start first?
Perfect.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay.
So please introduce yourself, where you're coming from, Xinyan, and your contribution to GLO, and then to the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. Yeah. Well, hi everyone. I feel very honored that I can have this opportunity to have a discussion on this wonderful paper called Female Breadwinning and Domestic Violence, Evidence from Australia. So as recommended, I will first start by giving a short self-introduction. My name is Xinyan Liu, and I come from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm currently the fourth-year PhD student here, and I will be graduating next year and joining the University of Tokyo as the research associate. And my research interests span the fields of labor economics, crime economics, as well as the education economics. And I feel very honored that I can join the GLO Young Scholar project this year. And the thesis title of my project is called Social Return of University Establishment, where I test whether establishing a university will help to reducing the criminal activities in the surrounding areas. And apart from the private return that has been widely discussed in the previous literature, I will be more focused on the social return or the social consequences of establishing an educational institution, which I think is also worth noting. I've also have some paper related to domestic violence. So I investigate how the women experience domestic violence will impact their labor market outcomes. So I inspired a lot from this paper. And then get back to our discussion paper, I will first make a short summary about this paper. So the paper empirically tested the relationship between the relative income within a heterosexual couple and the likelihood of experiencing physical or emotional abuse. So the paper found that the female breadwinning will make female more likely to experience domestic violence and make them more likely to experience the emotional abuse. And the paper suggested that the gender identity norm will be the driving mechanism for this relationship. And I will first start by introducing its contribution. So I think that the main contribution of this paper is that it reconciles the previous debate on which channel will dominate the relationship between income and domestic violence. So whether it is a bargaining theory that women earn more and she will experience less domestic violence, or it is a gender norm theory that the women earn more and she will experience more domestic violence. And this paper examined this question by considering a wide range of physical or emotional abuse instead of just using the severe abuse as measured by the hospitalization data in the previous literature. So I find this paper really inspiring, but I have two additional comments, and also I want to put forward some future directions that may worth trying in the future. So my first comment is that the author suggests that in Australia, a gender norm explanation for physical violence and emotional abuse is stronger than a bargaining theory. So I wonder whether there is any geographical heterogeneity. I find that the author did not mention it in the appendix or in the main text. So if I miss it, please let me know. So I really wonder whether there is, in some cities, the gender norm explanation may dominate, and maybe in some cities, the bargaining theory story will be dominant. And my second comment is that this paper suggested that a gender norm of male breadwinning, which when violated can create the negative disruption within the couple. So I wondered that whether the divorce rate also increases if the women earn more than the male. So as the author just suggested that the current results are driven by the couples when the female earn more than a male, but she still chooses to stay in this marriage. So I wonder whether in some cases when the female earn more than male and she experienced domestic violence before, then she will be more likely to have a divorce in the future when her bargaining power gets increased. So these are basically my two minor comments, and I also want to put forward some future directions. For example, regarding to the income and the domestic violence, I also want to see whether there is some intergenerational thing that how the family background of the female could impact the possibility of being abused. So whether the female coming from a richer or poorer family are more likely or less likely to experience domestic violence. And also I want to see how the marriage pattern, for example, whether a female marrying up to a man or the female marrying down to a man, or this couple are cross-race marriage, and how this marriage pattern could impact the possibility of being abused. So this might be the future directions, I think. So overall, I think it is a good paper. So thank you very much, and congratulations on winning this prize. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.
Kompal, can I give a couple of answers to that?
I don't know. Tarana, you okay for
yeah,
Bob to...
sure.
Okay,
that sounds good.
With their program. Yeah.
They'll be super short. It's easier while I have them in my head. Thank you very much for those comments. So in terms of anything that's kind of a panel nature, we can't do it because I only see people in a cross section. So I don't know whether they married up or down when they got married. I only see what their relationship is now. And I can't, so there were two questions you had that kind of were panel-y that I won't be able to answer. But we did look at the other question that you asked in appendix table H1. And basically we find astonishingly that this is the same, right? So we're looking at if both are born in Australia, 0.015. If neither is Australian born, 0.014, we start to get small sample sizes. One of them is not Australian born and one is. Sorry, only one, again, 0.022. The standard errors are getting big, so it's not always significant, but these numbers aren't changing is the key result. And then we look at whether people speak the same first language or not. So we look at kind of, this cross-cultural question, and we just are not seeing much difference there, is the answer to that question. And then your other question was about geography, and geography in Australia is completely uninteresting always. 95% of people live in urban areas, which are all identical, and then 5% of people live in remote and rural areas, which are completely impossible to know about because the sample sizes are small.
Thank you so much. So over to you, Tarana, for the discussion for this paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks so much to Klaus and Kompal for giving us this opportunity. And thanks to Robert for writing the paper and winning this prize so that we could all meet together today from different parts of the world. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Tarana Chauhan. I'm a PhD candidate at Cornell University. My research lies at the intersection of gender, labor, and development, and some of my work also touches upon climate change and development. And as part of this scholarship program, I am working on a paper that examines the effects of bank account ownership on married women's empowerment in India. So it looks at married women and their empowerment outcomes across urban and rural India, and it looks at a variety of empowerment outcomes. In a way, is answering questions that are now coming up in an ongoing debate on what are context-specific measures of empowerment, and are we defining empowerment in the right way? And I find very interesting results that in response to account ownership, households increase their uptake of banking services like formal savings and credit, but there is a decline in the consumption that is generally associated with women's empowerment. And there is also almost no effect on women's self-reported participation in decision-making. So this is relevant. In this paper, I examine a gender-neutral nationwide policy for account expansion in India. And so it's relevant for policymakers to also understand what are the distributional effects of policies that target the general population. And also I show results that this implementation of this policy varies by region, and how historical engagement with banking institutions actually play a significant role in outcomes for women and their empowerment. So I'll now move on to talking about the paper, and thank you again for presenting it today. Two things that Xinyan did a really great job in setting up the introduction and giving us an overview and summary. A couple of things I wanted to talk about that I really personally liked was just how well the literature was described. And the contribution of this paper was very clearly written out. And for me, as I'm just a young researcher and still learning how to write papers, I really thoroughly enjoyed that section, and it was a good learning for me. I also really admire the strong descriptive evidence that was provided in the paper, and that really helped motivate the analysis and kind of it made very clear as to why we were doing what we were seeing. I think the way it was set up was really great. I thought that, and the summary statistics, and especially the figure that you also presented today, was really cool. Now, I had some few thoughts which could be relevant for next steps or like going forward, but also just as questions for today as a discussion. The first was thinking about what could be driving. So the paper mentions that frequency of abuse is low, and that it's what you see in the data is either one time or very infrequent abuse. And I was wondering what could be the possible mechanism for it. I was just thinking about it, that is it possible that it's coming from, okay, beyond, if you were to interact just the relative incomes with the frequency of abuse, would you see something interesting that beyond like a very high, like at the upper thresholds of this relative income distribution, maybe men are towing the line, and so you're seeing less infrequent abuse, but there is, but in that from 0.5 to 0.75, you see like there is still women are reporting more frequent abuse. Is that possibly a story that could be going on? Second thing that I was, I'm sorry if I missed this. I was wondering if you were interested in looking at the heterogeneity by industry and also type of contractor worker. This is big. I was thinking more of this because you don't see results from by education, and so it could be that this is being driven, and it's just if it's coming from income channel, then is it that it's being driven by specific industries? And since we're looking at weekly income and earnings, especially for the potential outcome, then I was wondering, it looks very different, like the weekly earnings would look very different for a full-time versus a part-time worker. For a full-time worker, it would look very stable, whether it's by week or month, and for a part-time worker, it would be very different. So maybe that's something you would want to, if you had looked into it and you want to share anything about it, that would be really interesting to know. And then I was also thinking more about like, now looking outside of this income and domestic abuse literature, but what about asset ownership? So what you report is income, and that is not just earned income, but also government transfers and maybe other sources of earning. But thinking, I don't know if that's relevant for the middle class or the upper income classes in Australia, but what about asset ownership? And if one were to observe differences in asset ownership of men versus women, could that have an opposite effect, and could that actually outweigh the effects that you're seeing from the income gap? So I'll pause here. I think that these are my comments, and thanks so much for sharing the paper today.
Thank you so much, Tarana. Bob, do you want to come back on any of those questions and comments, please?
Sure. Yeah, from both discussants, I really appreciate your comments. One thing I would say is, you know, thank you for what you said about the review of the literature and the usefulness of what we wrote there. The first draft of the paper, that wasn't that good, actually. It got better because of the refereeing process, right? Referees sort of made us be a bit more explicit about what the literature said, how we fit into it. And so I guess another career advice to young people is take referees seriously and sometimes it can be a frustrating process, but I would say overall it generally is a process that improves papers and produces better science. And I think there I could definitely look and think, if I think back to the first version of the paper, that review of literature was not very well done, and that's something that referees forced us to do. We did start with the data. Both Jacqueline and I tend to be pretty empirical, and so we kind of start with the data and start with graphing things out, and that I think that the evidence there is strong and motivates the results. So thanks for that. Most of what you've asked, I can't do. The possible mechanism for infrequent abuse, it's true that we could do that kind of interaction. My gut feeling is we're just not going to find anything that we just don't have a lot of sample there that's going to move those numbers. But yeah, it could be tried. In the Bartik instrument, we use industry. I don't know anything about the type of contract people have, and I don't know specifically what people's wages are. So I can't tell the difference between people who are on, fixed term contracts or casual work, or whether people have, I just know this one annual income measure. So the income here is pretty frustratingly aggregated. On the last point, so one of the things that happened when I wrote this paper is that we had a bit of media coverage, and I had people emailing me. I had women emailing me and saying, this is my situation. I had a woman who was a doctor email me and said, I started earning more than my husband when I finished med school, and suddenly he started abusing me. I had another woman who wrote me and said, my whole life I earned less than my husband, and she was in her 50s, and she said, my parents died and I actually inherited a lot of money. And so suddenly I became very independent because I had all this wealth and I could make all these decisions for myself. And my husband started physically abusing me. So some of the emails I got were pretty, like I mean, whenever you get into these kind of topics, people have personal stories that they want to share with you, right? So people are writing me these very personal emails about their experience of abuse and how it kind of resonated with our paper. So I guess all I can offer you, Tarana, is an anecdote about that last bullet point. But in the data, again, I don't have asset ownership here, and so my gut feeling is this is important. Anything that's going to disrupt that balance of power, right, within a couple, and assets clearly can play a role there. So yeah, it would be good to have a lot more data.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, especially sharing the anecdotes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xinyan. Thank you so much, Tarana and Bob, for all that discussion. Are there any more questions? We have scope for 2 questions, at most 3. But yes, if there are any pressing question, please go on.
Right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, Rob, and congratulations on winning the prize. I'm from New Zealand, so we've got some things in common with Australia, and certainly certain trends that are similar across the Tasman. And this is 2 points. One is about whether geography matters or not. Now, I actually think it matters, but at a completely different scale from what you were thinking. And I'm thinking of the allocation of liquor outlets within urban areas. Yeah, population is highly urbanized. And the research we've done here in New Zealand shows that the deregulation of the alcohol liquor industry, the outlets and the location of those, particularly in areas where relatively poorer people, less mobility, but they make it available at them at a sort of walking distance. There's a direct relationship with abuse. There's just definitely crime and all these sorts of negative social outcomes highly correlated with the decisions that have been made regarding the location of these outlets. So that's definitely a cost of that sort of deregulation. Now, it's possible that because you take things into account, such, there are variables in there already of the sort of level of income, the sort of the socioeconomic status. So that maybe that is already taken to some extent into account, but that's where the geography, I think, may play some role. But another aspect has to do more with the life cycle and the allocation of time, and particularly labor force participation over the life cycle. Now, we know that men have gradually had a decline in labor force participation, and we know at older ages, the labor force participation is declining more and more. So if I have this sort of very, very simple theory and that's based on some research we have done here with aged people, is maybe conflict is related to the exposure to each other at home on a sort of hourly basis, or the amount of time that they interact with each other vis-a-vis the amount of time that they interact with other people. And you're quite often this conventional story is when traditionally, of course, maybe the female partner works fewer hours, the male partner works more hours, and then when the male partner partially retires or retires, there may be this sort of story, oh, we're spending so much time now together, oh, I'm getting sick of it. There's a tendency, maybe while things were going fine, while they both had their careers and basically spend a lot of the allocation of time is to things which do not involve direct interaction, maybe as they are interacting more. And so I don't know whether your survey actually picks up only abuse and those who are close to pretty much working full-time, or certainly a large number of hours, but whether you can see any effect of what's happening at the older ages, where maybe, although I would have thought the woman withdraw from the labor force a bit earlier than men. So there would have kind of been the opposite effect of what you're finding. But I don't know whether anything about this kind of exposure to each other in relation to hours worked over the life cycle might have an effect.
This is the good thing about being an academic, is you can just keep working, become emeritus, go to your office every day and maintain a good relationship
like
with
me,
your
yeah.
There you go. This life advice. So in this online appendix in table D3, we do divide up by different deciles of age, and we interact the relative income with different deciles of age. And the answer is we don't find much. But the sample size is pretty thin above age 50. So I don't think I'm able to actually dig into that kind of retirement, getting out of the labor force. And in that, the results there are pretty mixed, but we're still finding that earning more than half share has a statistically significant effect. And when we add in all the controls, we don't really find any age effect when we interact that by different age deciles, or if we interact it by like the younger half of the sample and the older half of the sample. So we're just, I think you're asking a slightly more precise question that maybe we don't have sample size to get at, but that online appendix table, we did look at that.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thank you, Bob. What I might do is request if there are any more questions to put them in the chat box. We'll get to them. But I want to move to Klaus now, and Klaus is going to be talking about the JOPE, Journal of Population Economics report. And over to you, Klaus.
Oh, I think I've somehow muted me. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
And we can hear you now. Yep. Perfect.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I quickly want to summarize a few of the success stories of the year and inform you about how we are performing in detail. Now, the Journal of Population Economics is doing research on the economics of population, household, and human resources in general. So we are doing work on global issues, economic demography, family, household, migration, labor, development, health, risky behavior, fertility, mortality, marriage, divorce. These are the kind of issues we are dealing with. We are a field journal. We, however, take the whole range of articles from applied to theory, but we like full articles, not notes. So long appendices are fine, even if they are 120 pages long, which is a little bit too much, I think. But but if you have it, it doesn't hurt. Okay. Now, the number of submissions are high and becoming higher. Last year, we had about 718. This year, it will be, that's a good prediction, 800, so a bit more than last year. Final acceptance rate, 6.3%. Last year, it's always in recent years in this kind of range. Now, if you look at our output, you may have been surprised. Traditionally, we publish 4 issues with 10 articles each. This year is kind of an explosive situation, which has a good explanation. We are publishing or have published 16, 26, and 32 papers. Well, this has to do with a significant backlog we had accumulated over recent years, partly mostly because of COVID and the need to publish more papers at the time. Now we wanted to get rid of all the backlog. So in reality, we have only published 45 articles fresh this year. All the others were from the previous year. This means at the end of this year, we are clean with the whole backlog. This has to do with a decision we have made recently that we move over from the past tradition to what is called continuous article publishing from 2024 on. What does this mean? This means basically, well, we no longer decide where and what comes into an issue, and we have no, let's say, backlog anymore. All what is published online. It's counted by Clarivate for the impact factor anyway at this moment, and goes in the running issue, which comes out again 4 times a year. So from January on, everything what is online, is published. There's no difference between an issue and what others have accounts as published. That's what the story is. So we have about 24 of papers which will come out early next year already. So we still will of course keep size under control, but we are more flexible in terms of quantity. But we will only move with more quantity if we can ensure the quality or even make it better. Now, of course, we need good papers, and where are these papers are coming from? If you look to the left-hand side of this picture here, you see here the graph, and well, basically, our submissions come from Europe and from Asia, in particular from China, much less from the United States in terms of inflow. And the rest of the continents are not relevant. So that's what the situation is. There was once a little bit different situation. Asia is let's say, the experience of the last 10 years. It has largely to do with the rise of China. Now, if you move on, well, submitted, who is submitting? Yes, and the largest country of origin is China, followed by the United States, United Kingdom, Italy, Germany, Spain, India, and so on. In terms of accepted papers, it's a bit different. There was still leading, United Kingdom second, Germany third, Italy, and so on, then China. So China is moving up, and we expect that the quality of the Chinese papers become even better and may play a bigger role in the future. Now, who is looking at us? And there it's more 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. If you look at these colors here, it's North America, it's Europe, and it's Asia. So we are read. What I wanted to signal, we are read globally very well, and that's what our interest is to establish, and that's why we also like to be this morning in Australia to make clear to China, Australia, Asia, that New Zealand, including that we would like to get the best papers in our area in this field, since we also now relatively strong. We have never been as strong as this year currently. You see to the left the Clarivate impact factor. In the past, we came slowly up. Now 2022 was so big of a jump that we refused to replace the figure. We moved to 6.1, which brings us at the same level as the Chronometrica, just as an example. We are not claiming to have beaten the Chronometrica, but it's certainly, it's a kind of very different journal than a field journal. It's a more general journal with a very high, of course, reputation. If you look at the side scores, you see that there's a similar picture for the experts or non-experts among you. Side scores are broader defined, more longer history, more to the past, and also covering more publications, including also non-Clarivate journals, and also articles in books and so on. Now there you see we are with 9.2 looking is at a very high ranked situation, of course far away from the top field journals, journals of the field, but above the China Economic Review here in this case, and Journal of Labor Economics, Journal of Development Economics, Journal of Human Resources, just as a few examples, are behind us this year. Of course, we know that these kind of statistics can fluctuate quite a lot, but nevertheless, what we have at the moment implies that we are number 1 in demography and number 38 in economics, just as in some information. Now, these are the kind of journals which made our success recently, among many others, of course. It's the 12 top-ranked, high-cited articles for the impact factor of the current and the newest one of 2022. And you see, publishing in this journal, you can get lots of citations. Top number 1 is still, I think, Xi is with us. One of his articles with 276 citations in total, but 85 for the running year. Now, what is important to see is that it's not only COVID-19, but the issues we are interested in also in the future is working from home, income inequality, happiness, presidential elections, the political issues are of interest. Of course, gender issues, mental health, education, child labor, all these kind of issues which are playing a role here are of relevance for us in the future. Now, this is are the editors, and you will see all of them these days. We can be quite proud to have all of them acting as chairs of sessions. In the next 2 days, we have some more of these people. Now, we have, of course, lots of interesting topics which are listed here, which you know we are interested in, and they will be part of what we call also collections, or what our publisher is calling collections. We are moving into that policy. So next to the sequence of ordinary published papers, these papers are to a certain extent allocated, if appropriate, to specific topics, so getting specific attention. This is kind of, it's not a special issue. Some journals handle this concept as special issues. We will go on not having special issues anymore, but we had some decades ago, but we gave that up because we want to have under control the process by the editors. So the editors you have seen will also handle the collections as the key actors, but we will define in the future more fields where we would like to see encourage submissions to give them a particular visibility. And one of these issues we are pushing at the moment is gender issues and domestic violence. And so that's why the Kuznets Prize this year fits very well into that kind of profiling we want to give to the journal. So we are interested to get more material, and we have already some on the study. We also will go on having more specific workshops where the journals involved. We just had one of those is the IESR at Xinyan University, where some of the people here being present, were also presenting work. Now, if you want to learn more about these collections, you find that on the JOPE website. I just show you how these kind of things are looking. The publisher is just at the moment renovating the website of their journals. So you see some attempts. If you have seen our pages earlier, you might be surprised of the new look. We are not too much involved in it, so some of the details I would have liked to do differently, but that's how it is always in life. And if you go there and you click journal updates, yes, you get here, and under journal updates you see these collections and calls for papers. A thing which is we handle in a specific way, which is different from other journals. But here you find the listing of the topics. At the moment we have 6 there, but there will be about 24 in the next half year. We have already the listing. We don't want to start with all of at the same time. So to give specific fields a particular focus. And if you would click on any of these topics, you would get a listing of all the articles we have already published in the past or are currently publishing. And well, if you submit an article in the future, you might also be included here to get extra PR. Okay, so that's all what I wanted to say, and I give back to Kompal.
Thank you, Klaus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now, I move into the Kuznets Prize ceremony. And the way it's going to operate is I'm going to give a little bit of a background of the Kuznets Prize, and then Astghik from Curtin University is going to give the Laudatio for the prize, and then we'll have Robert say a few words about the prize and his experience about the paper. So annually, the editors of the Journal of Population Economics award the Kuznets Award to the best paper published in the journal during the year. The process started in 2014, and it's been given annually to one paper. And the papers are judged by the editors of the journal. All the editors, as Klaus just showed on that screen, were enrolled in this year's decision making. So Simon Kuznets, the prize is named after him. He was a Russian-American development economics and a statistician. He was a pioneer in population economics. He was a professor emeritus at Harvard University and the 1971 Nobel Prize laureate in economics. He was the winner of the 3rd prize for the Nobel. He was born in 1901 and in Belarus, and came to the US in 1922. And then he was doing all his education from Columbia University. During World War II, he was the Associate Director of the Bureau of Planning and Statistics on the World Production Board, and he served on the staff of the National Bureau of Economic Research from 1927 to 1960. He was a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania for 24 years, and he was a professor of political economy at Johns Hopkins University from 1954 until he joined Harvard in 1960. In early 1949, Kuznets was one of the relative few economists who thought that the Great Depression was an exception and that strong long-term growth was the rule. He was awarded the 1971 prize for his empirically founded interpretation of economic growth, which was led to the new and deeply insight into the economics and social structure and the process of economic development. He set the standard for national income accounting, enabling accurate estimates of the gross national product to be calculated for the very first time. So with that background and the prestige of this prize clearly laid out, we are here today to celebrate the best paper of 2023. This prize is on the 90 articles published in the journal in 2023. And on behalf of the editors of the Population Economics, Journal of Public Economics, I'm delighted to share that this year's Kuznets Prize goes to the paper published in the 36th volume. The title is what we all know, Female Breadwinning and Domestic Abuse, Evidence from Australia. And the paper has already, when the decision was being made, accessed 982 times and cited more than 12 times in Google Scholar. So congratulations, Professor Breunig and Jacqueline Zhang for this excellent paper. Jacqueline is not here with us, but she's a research fellow affiliated at the Arndt Gordon Department of Economics and Tax and Transfer Policy Institute at the Crawford School of Public Policy at Australian National University. She obtained her PhD at Texas A&M in 2018. And her research interests span across the areas of this journal as well. Professor Breunig is with us, and he's the director of Tax and Transfer Policy Institute at the Crawford School. He's one of Australia's leading public policy economists. He has published over 50 international academic journals in economics and public policy. He has made a significant contribution to the area of relationship between childcare, women labor supply, and as he was talking earlier today as well. So we have the abstract of the paper on the website. We have a page allocated to the prize for this year. If you're interested, please find your way to the GLO website. And now I want to hand over to Astghik to give just follow up on this prize. Congratulations, Robert and Jacqueline. Astghik.
Thanks, Kompal. I'd also like to join Kompal and other colleagues to congratulate Bob and Jacqueline for the recognition of their very significant contribution to population economics. Congratulations on being awarded the Kuznets Prize. I'm also very pleased to see this important work being recognized as we are going through the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. As Bob mentioned in his presentation, IPV is a huge problem. It's highly prevalent, it's very costly, and it destroys lives. And even though the awareness of the problem has grown, and especially during the years of the COVID, the solutions to it haven't. Within economics, there's still very limited research, I would say, on the root causes of violence against women, which would inform elimination efforts and ultimately help women locked into cycles of violence. And this is an area, the economics of violence against women, that is of significance to the Journal of Population Economics, and Klaus mentioned a little bit about this. We aspire to support this emerging area of research in economics through various initiatives, and Klaus mentioned about the focus collection on sexual and domestic violence, with also the thematic workshops being organized, and more recently in Xinyan University, which was a very successful workshop, I would say. And the interesting topic about the problem of violence against women that I find is that it's highly prevalent in both developing and developed countries. So which suggests that unlike many other problems, economic development isn't in and of itself the solution to the problem. But policies to address violence often focus on economic empowerment of women. The work of Bob and Jacqueline fills a significant gap, I think, in our understanding of the causes of IPV. It shows that when a woman earns more than her partner, this significantly heightens the incidence of violence and emotional abuse against a woman. So when the gender norm of male breadwinning is violated, then there's a significant negative disruption that happens in the couple. This is a very important result, and a key implication that comes out of it is that without addressing the gender norms, economic empowerment initiatives can have even some undesirable consequences for some. So once again, congratulations, Bob. My congratulations go to Jacqueline for recognition of this very important work to population economics. Now back to Kompal.
Thank you, Astghik. I'd like to make a correction there. Olena, who's with us, she's on the GLO leader. She just reminds me or corrects me there that Imon Kuznets was born in Ukraine. Kharkiv is his birthplace, which is in Ukraine, and Kharkiv National University is named after him. So my sincere apologies for that incorrect source. I need to go check where I got that information from. But thank you so much, Olena. And yes, thank you, Astghik, for that wonderful summary of that paper. I would now move to Bob for his thoughts and his experience of publishing this paper. And yes, over to you.
Thanks, Kompal. Yeah, thank you, Klaus. That was a great presentation about the journal. Incredibly impressive how the Journal of Population Economics. I mean, it has a very strong reputation, but the citations that you're generating and the way that the journal has moved up the rankings is really pretty impressive. So well done. Can I get a copy of those slides? I want to share that Journal of Population Economic ranking slide with a few colleagues of mine. So it's good to get the word out there so that people know. And yeah, thank you, Kompal, Astghik, for those kind words, Klaus, and to all the people on the committee who chose us for the prize. You know, as I think I already gave some reflections on the writing of the paper. It was, you know, it was an incredibly I guess, exciting paper to write in the sense that the data so clearly were showing this very strong relationship that is shocking. But I guess at the same time, if you kind of think about traditional gender norms and some of the other evidence we have about relationship duration and couple satisfaction, it's sort of an extension of those things, and it's showing that this uncomfortableness that comes about when women out-earn men manifests itself in lots of different ways, and violence is one of those. There in the paper we quote a statistic from the World Values Survey. The World Values Survey is run in a lot of different countries, and there's a question in there that says, do you think it's a problem if women earn more than men? And the question is very vague, right? In the sense that maybe the problem is that people know that if women earn more than men, there's going to be more abuse, right? But anyway, something like 37% of women in Australia say, yeah, it's a problem if a wife out-earns her husband. And that just seems to me like a shockingly high number of people who agree with that statement. And yet, really consistent with the results in our paper that there is a problem, or there are multiple problems, and one of those problems is domestic violence. And Astghik, thanks for your comments about this implicit idea that economic development is the key. I think this is an issue where economic development is not what's going to change things, right? And we need to think really hard about if we really genuinely want to create equal opportunity for men and women, we need to really think hard about the barriers to those things, many of which are cultural, and even in the workplace, right? I mean, we know, all the research that's coming out now, suggests that a lot of the gender equality is driven by, when couples have children, and it's women who stay home and take care of the kid, or who make the sacrifices in terms of job and labor market. And the men specialize in making money, and this is a big driver of the gender wage gap, even though women's education rates, in Australia, way outstrip men's education rates. There's lots more women going to university than men. The gap is really quite big. But then something happens when people, leave medical school and start working, or leave law school and start working, and these kind of gender norms are really powerful, right? And I think, as I said, I think this is a hard issue for economists, right? If what's happening, if people are specializing within the household, we think specialization is good. We think that's normal. We think that increases utility. If people are both choosing, if men and women are choosing the thing that makes them happiness and brings them the total amount of greatest well-being, then that's great. We don't want to stop people from doing that. But if instead there's a cultural paradigm and a set of norms that are actually trapping people into certain choices that are suboptimal, then we need to think hard about what are the kind of programs, and it's not programs like, oh, we're going to force all the men to take care of the kids and let the women work, right? Obviously, it's not heavy-handed things, but yeah, I think it's quite difficult to start to think of the right set of policies. Some things are obvious, right? We want, better paid parental leave divided between men and women, better childcare support, better opportunities for people to re-enter the labor market. But that creates opportunity, but it may not necessarily change the choice set for a lot of people. So actually, this is I'm leaving. I'm ending with just lots of questions more than answers, but it is something where I think there's a rich vein of research going forward, and a lot of scope to run some randomized control trials, to look at policy changes in different areas, to see if we can detect what policies actually work to decrease domestic violence. And there too, there's a whole research about, police cracking down on domestic violence sometimes just causes people not to report it because they don't want to, so there's a whole, it's a very complicated area, both the measurement and the policy. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So what I might say now is that we have a certificate for you, but I can hand it to you clearly. Klaus here will send it to you by email, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Klaus for organizing this wonderful conference for quite a few years. I think 3 years in the running now, isn't it, Klaus? I might be wrong. And it's done quite well. And so yes, congratulations. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I will now just quickly check with Klaus if we have any other issues if you want to say a few words there, Klaus.
Yeah, I would like to be proud to see all of you acting in such a wonderful way to celebrate this good paper on a very important topic, and then on a focus the journal wants to push. And certainly these are lots of efforts, and I think the way how we can present this to the wider profession and also outside is important, because this is videotape and it will be on the GLO website, and we'll try to do extra propaganda, so to speak, with the material. And of course, we hope that this important work is recognized by the profession, and hopefully it gets heavily cited in the future. And I encourage all of you to distribute information. And of course, this was a long, hard first day. I mean, some of you were just getting up. Others have already been with us for now about 9 hours or so. Well, this is just the first day. So, on the other hand, I'm also very happy to realize that all the sessions have been were going very well. We had everywhere lively discussions, and this encourages us to go on with it. Okay, thank you very much. Good night, good day, whatever, wherever you are. In what?
Congratulations, Bob.
Yeah.
And to Jacqueline.
Join me in congratulating Bob. I have to ask one last question to you, Bob. In one of the graphs, you said the females are working lesser and the males are working the same in Australia. So I'm wondering who's doing the work then, because I might need to change the dynamics in my household based on what you say.
So it was at the Hilda conference. I'd have to look. It was in the session. It was in one of the sessions I was presenting. I would have to go and look up the author, but I'll try to do that. But
no, thank you so much.
And again, I said it at the beginning, but I mean, we're very honored and pleased and flattered to receive this prize. And thank you very much. And I will pass on all the nice things you said to Jacqueline.
Thank you. So we give you back 10 minutes of your day. Yes, I hear somebody.